Most people don't know what's holding them back, but you do because you listen to me, Sam, your self-care guru and journal junkie. Welcome to Journal Entries, your safe place where you can tune in weekly to get tips, tricks, and journal prompts to uncover your feelings, gain clarity, and make your move. Welcome to today's journal entry. Today we have a special guest, Haley Schiek. She is a certified professional coach, yoga teacher, and surf instructor who specializes in eating disorder recovery and psycho-spiritual wellness. She is the owner of Kosana Coaching, a mental health company that she founded in 2021 to increase access to alternative outpatient eating disorder recovery support. After experiencing several traumas in her youth, Haley sought professional help. The many people who helped Haley heal along the way greatly inspired Haley's professional path and shaped her understanding of the importance of community. Now, almost 15 years later, Haley specializes in supporting others in healing from chronic dieting, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, orthorexia, body dysmorphia, and co-occurring disorders like substance misuse. As a coach, Haley integrates her professional training in Western psychology and Eastern spiritual practices with personal recovery experience to help clients release self-hate, reclaim their health, and experience peace with food after disordered eating. I am so excited to go there with this podcast and talk about these very real issues that so many women face. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the Journal Entries podcast, Haley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Big fan of your work.
Why, thank you. I'm very excited to chat with you because something that I think I may have mentioned a few times, maybe dropped in on a couple episodes, that I've struggled with is binge eating disorder, but I've never made a big thing out of it. And Haley here helps with disordered eating. So yeah, we're gonna have a whole big conversation on what it is, nervous system stuff, and I'm excited to dig in. My first question for you though is how did you get started with all of this and in this world?
I love telling this story because I feel like this is the part of my life where things started to really click. I graduated from college into the pandemic in 2020. I took a corporate office job as an office manager, and it was really interesting. It was a very neat office. There was dogs and, $700 Costco runs and all sorts of cool perks, ping pong tables and scooters. You would think the dream office. But I felt so empty in this role and in this company, and graduated from college, I guess, with big hopes to have a positive impact on the world, and just felt like there was no path forward for me. And I was told, going into college, oh, you're studying psychology, you have every opportunity under the sun. Once you finish with this degree, you can go a lot of places with psychology. And then when it came time to graduate, everyone, who was saying that was now saying, well, you need to go to grad school, actually, if you want to do anything in psychology. And I love school. I love learning. And this was not going to happen. I was so burnt out. I went through all of middle school and high school and college. And, I bet someday I'll return to school, but I'm still not ready to go back. And it's been over 4 years. So I felt really like I was floating around and unmoored until I found a LinkedIn post for a job called Eating Disorder Recovery Coach. And truly from that moment on, my perception of myself, my the direction I wanted to take my professional career in, everything totally changed.
Wow. From a LinkedIn post.
A LinkedIn post. I can't, I've already mentioned them in another podcast, but Recovery Frameworks, Isaac and Andrew, they're these two guys, they're out of Atlanta. They're like a case management company, and I wasn't really familiar with case management of mental health. They help coordinate treatment for people who want to go to a treatment center, maybe need that sort of support. And they help coordinate the continued care with coaches who really come in to help support people as they're integrating back into their quote unquote normal life. And so them opening the door to this whole new profession of coaching was it was the first time that I viewed myself and my lived experiences as an asset instead of a liability.
Mm. Now, do you have experience with disordered eating too?
Yes, so I do have lived experience, and I would say that is a big portion of kind of like where the magic in working with me or with a recovery coach is and that's what's so different from a therapist, right? Like therapists are really encouraged to not self-disclose and to kind of remain stoic. And a coach with lived experience is known as a peer support coach. And your lived experience is encouraged to be shared if it's to the benefit of the client. And I think there's a lot of cases in coaching where it makes a lot of sense. And we have to be careful, right, about like not over empathizing and, saying, yes, it is so hard and it can just keep being this hard and you don't need to do anything about it. Um, so I try really hard to withhold some of my desire to just jump in and be like, you're right. Like it's so messed up that your mom called you fat. Like that's really wrong. And instead, help us explore like, okay, what are the thoughts that pretty rude thing that your mom said, what have they triggered and how are they informing the emotions that you're now feeling and how is that influencing how you're behaving around food and what is the result of those behaviors? So really helping people slow down and understand their, thought, feeling, action, overall
Mm.
reality. And I think my lived experience does play a huge role in being able to piece that out.
Yeah, and also just relate to them, which I think is huge. And coaching someone is like that lived experience and knowing what they're actually going through rather than just trying to imagine it.
Right. And instead of trying, like, I'm not here to treat anyone. That's not my role. So I'm not trying to fix someone. Like someone's coming to me and I'm like, I'm your equal. You might look up to me because I'm a coach and I look up to my coaches. And I think that is sort of the nature of the role, but there's way less of a power dynamic, I think, because I have been in your shoes. And that's really important with recovery from an eating disorder because power is so tied into how we eat, and especially as women. And I think it might take some unpacking to understand that connection between feeling powerful in your life and understanding how you eat. But in recovery, it is really important if you're, say, a 13-year-old girl and you've got a power dynamic with your mom and your mom is trying to help you eat healthier and she's noticing some things that she's concerned about. Well, your 13-year-old daughter might just simply not want to hear it from mom. Like there's a power dynamic there. So it's nice that I can sort of step in and remove that and be more of like a friend in recovery.
Yeah, I love that. And I like that too that you mentioned the difference between a coach and a therapist because I did go to a therapist for my binge eating, and I still remember calling to make an appointment because it was the first time that I acknowledged that I was struggling with this, especially to somebody else, like let alone myself, but like to anybody else, like verbally. So I went, and I think we only had 4 sessions, maybe. And I'm very good at coming off as like very well put together, I think. I hope, but very well put together. And so the first session that we had, I just kind of shared how I was feeling and my eating habits and maybe what was triggering it. And that, no, you know what? I think we only had 2, maybe 3 sessions. And by the end, she was just like, well, seems like you're good. And in my head, I'm like, but I'm not. Like, there's so much more. And like, with disordered eating, it like, at least for me, it like comes and goes. And like, there's so many cycles. And clearly that was just the wrong therapist, or I should have hired a coach for that. But yeah, that was not what I needed at the time.
What a disappointing reaction from a provider. Like
Yeah.
I'm cringing hearing that. And I also think that's like a really unfortunately kind of common experience, especially, and I love therapy and I really think that there's a huge place and need for therapy. Um, but I also think there's this thing that can happen where therapists can be really focused on like the DSM. And if you're not maybe overtly expressing those behaviors that fall under, say, anorexia, you might be masking enough and they might not be able to get that out of you, or you might not meet the clinical threshold where they feel really concerned. And I think that is what's so frustrating about disordered eating. And I am currently even frustrated hearing it from people in my support group, my summer bodies support group, who are saying, I'm getting tremendous benefit out of being in this group. And I also feel like I don't belong here. Like, I don't feel like I deserve to take up space because I don't have a true eating disorder. I just have body insecurity and I gained a little weight and I'm a little anxious about eating. And so on so many levels, disordered eating gets really downplayed and normalized, and it's so easy to cover up. So that's just disappointing to hear that it
Right.
happened to you as well.
Yeah, because underneath all of it is like really powerful emotion, right? No matter what the weight of that person is, or like the people in your group, it's like you might look a certain way, but the habits that you have are stemmed from really powerful beliefs, brings me to a question. Is there a certain belief or thought that is most common when people come in to work with you that you hear?
Mm, there's definitely themes. So some of the beliefs that we first usually uncover are I'm defective, I'm fundamentally different, I'm not safe as I am, I'm not safe to be myself, um, who I am is not lovable. It's like a lot of fear around like core self identity worthiness. And then the feelings that those beliefs tend to trigger, and those are usually what we first encounter, right? People are like, well, I feel really shameful, I feel so much guilt, or I feel really stuck and hopeless is the thing that I hear most of all, which is usually tied to some belief about a fundamental defect or being an exception.
Mm-hmm.
And the belief of being an exception is a pretty interesting one, and I have a lot of experience with that belief. For whatever reason, that's like the one that I really internalized. I'm an exception. And that can play out in two different ways. It can make you feel, either entitled, like I'm different, I deserve different treatment, or I'm defective, am unworthy. And so either way, this I'm an exception belief is super isolating, and it's not helpful for creating a connected and healthy reality. Other one is like I need this to stay in control. And like if I don't have this way of maintaining control, then I am unsafe.
Oh, yeah. I feel like for me, it was something control related for sure.
I think for most people it is. And I think we don't finish that sentence enough. Like people are like, oh, eating disorders are just about control. And it's like, okay, controlling what? It's
Hmm.
not about controlling their food or even necessarily their weight. For most people, it's some flavor of controlling the pain that they feel.
Hmm.
So even if there's emotional pain, say they're in like an unsatisfactory marriage and they're really having to stuff down their feelings, and maybe their husband is disrespectful, so they're eating and stuffing it down because they don't feel comfy expressing their anger. They come in with all these beliefs, but they want to talk about food.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's just like I love it because it's just not about the food. And I for so long was like, no, it's about the food. In my early
Yes.
recovery, I was like, no, it's not how I feel. Like it's very black and white. It's my weight is a problem.
Yeah.
I need to just weigh this, and then all the other problems will go away. And if I just eat this, it'll be fine. And that's
Hmm.
the illusion of diet culture and disordered eating, is you think you can
Yeah.
protect yourself from all of the uncomfortable feelings of being human if you are perfect, if you eat this
Hmm.
way, if all those things.
It's like if the Pop Tarts just didn't exist, then I would be okay.
Right. If I just didn't have this belly fat, which I've learned is like actually my uterus jutting out a little bit, we think we'd be so much happier when in actuality our body would be stoked if we just stopped trying to get rid of that little bit of flub, and
Yes.
just
Yes.
prioritize feeding the body.
So, one thing I wanted to ask you is why intentional weight loss is not always healthy. That's something that you mentioned once, and I was like, wait, I need more of your perspective on this.
I love that question. So I think that because we live in such a disordered culture when it comes to thinking about weight and food and health, um, I think pursuing intentional weight loss is dangerous. And I know that that might sound dramatic, but I've just seen it go wrong more times than I've seen it go right. I actually don't know if I've ever seen it go right and stay good,
Hmm.
when people intentionally are trying to lose weight or are dieting. And the reason I think that it's dangerous is because in our culture, we have conflated the idea of being healthy with the idea of being thin. So when we talk about losing weight, we're talking about becoming thinner, not necessarily becoming healthier. And there's a lot of really dangerous disordered eating practices that are pretty normalized. I was vegan for a portion of college, and that was a really interesting time because there was part of me that really believed in veganism, but there was another part of me that was like, well, this is the most restrictive, kind
Hmm.
of elitist diet that I can think of, this pure, diet. And I've studied yoga, so it kind of played into this whole, just needing to be perfect and pure idea. And I think that many women are sort of taught that that is a good path to pursue, both
Yeah.
for identity and for social power and like earning respect. But when we pursue weight loss over pursuing health promoting activities, I just think we're like chasing the wrong ball. We're not.
Mm.
You might think that you're heading towards health, but you're really putting yourself at risk of disordered eating. Like, once we start calorie counting, there's a significantly increased risk for disordered eating behaviors and food obsession. And if you're focusing on losing weight, you either are doing that usually by decreasing the amount that you're eating or increasing the amount that you're exercising or both. Um, and it would be great if we more so, instead of focus on an outcome that we can't control, right? If we set goals that we actually don't have true influence over, we're bound to be disappointed. And that's one of the lies of diet culture is we can control our weight. We totally buy into this myth because it's been sold to us really, really well for many years. But we can't control our weight. We can influence it for sure, but the body has a place that it likes to live at. And it might be bigger than you want to be.
Mm.
And that's just where your healthy set point is. So, no matter how much you do to try to reduce your weight, your body's going to really resist that and try to keep you safe at this certain number. It's different for everybody. And then the other thing is once we start dieting or restricting or increasing our exercise, we potentially trigger starvation mode. So that's when our brain really starts to go haywire about food because it thinks that we're not going to have a consistent supply of it moving forward. So this is especially true if you're someone who's restricting or reducing your caloric intake or is starting to really look at food labels. Your brain is gonna freak out. And so if you start binge eating after that, it's really just a biological response
Mm.
to the restriction. But once you start binge eating, it's obviously really hard to gain or to lose weight. So it's just this horrible cycle. And we can skip the whole cycle if we don't shoot for weight loss. And instead, we aim for increasing the health promoting behaviors that sure might result in weight loss, but they also might not. But that's an outcome we can't control. So we really got to take accountability for the things that we can influence and to a degree control, like how many times we get outside a week, how much water we drink in a day, if we're making sure that we have adequate fuel, because you're certainly not going to sustainably improve your health if you're not eating enough and your brain literally doesn't have enough nutrients for you to think straight.
I that felt so reassuring when you said like our bodies have a weight that it's happy at, like your happy weight. I love that. And the whole like we can't determine it and we can't force our bodies to lose weight. We can influence it and that it's almost like a marketing scheme. I've never thought of it in that way.
It's yes, it really is a marketing scheme. Like when oh, I just have so many emotions come up at once as we talk about this because I think anger is like the biggest emotion that we are allowed to be marketed to in this way, and that we are so misled to pursue health in ways that actually destroy our health. And developing an eating disorder is no joke. And even if you don't meet the clinical threshold for disordered eating, just having that increased body consciousness where you're super self-aware of your body and more critical of it and don't have that self-trust of just intuitively being able to pick what you want to eat. Now you're really, second guessing yourself and cross-referencing whatever app it is that's telling you how much you should or shouldn't eat. It just opens the door to all sorts of scary stuff that is way harder to recover from than I think we understand going into things that seem so harmless as a diet.
Yeah. And I think people listening that have been through it or are in the middle of it can know how hard it is. They can definitely relate. I used to be obsessed with the MyFitnessPal app, and
Oh,
you too?
that was literally the starting point of it all.
Yes.
I've tried
Yes.
to, get the red. I was going for like net negative, and it was telling me I only had 1,200 calories
Yeah,
allowed per day. I hope it doesn't allow people to select that anymore, but that was
I
like the
know.
recommended caloric intake of the time.
Yes, yep, same. Yeah, and I would track my like calories in, calories out, like burned through exercise. Yeah, and for me too, that was like the start of it all. And now I've gotten to a point where I don't track anything. I don't track my calories. I don't have like any watch that tracks anything at all. Which I love. It feels so free being going from like the person who used to track everything to like literally not tracking anything at all. But I know a lot of people are in that mindset of I should track calories or macros or even like, the 75 hard. I see that all over social media.
Yeah.
So what like tips or advice do you have for the people that are stuck in that and like have so many
Mm.
rules around what they can eat?
So a number of things come to mind. There's some red flags I think that might be helpful to look out for. And you brought up the 75 hard. So if you're noticing that the behaviors that you're engaging in are not sustainable, and it might be like a challenge, you might be in a challenge, but you're feeling like, how can I keep doing this? This is like really hard, or this is a lot, or this feels extreme. And maybe you even get some like confidence and a sense of power and accomplishment from that. But maybe there's another part of you that is like, this sort of feels like it's turning into something different. I think that's a red flag, because we really want to focus on just living a healthful life and not trying to do these, cleanses or resets or 30-day, 70-day challenges. So I think if you're in that cycle, just recognizing it and understanding that you can actually have a safe, healthful, content life without engaging in those practices, like that is actually something that you can achieve and it is available. It might take support to create that normalcy for you, but it is something that I highly recommend pursuing instead of pursuing like crazy challenges like the 75 hard.
hmm Like jumping to the 75 soft, maybe.
Yeah, I'm like, how about some yin yoga?
Right.
Whose nervous system is regulated right now?
Yeah.
Not most of ours. So um I think that would be the second thing, is notice when, like if you're reaching for food, for like I'm super content with people emotionally eating. I think that's actually allowed and that's fine. And we need to reduce shame about emotional eating. It happens. And I also think if you're noticing that your emotions are really driving your eating behaviors, that's like a time to check in, and maybe get someone else on your team, or at least in the loop about what you're going through, because that is definitely like the slippery slope that you're
Yeah.
on.
I love it. That's helpful. I like that too, like feeling less shame around emotional eating because I think a lot of
Mm.
people do it and there is so much guilt and shame. And like while you're doing it, it's like, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be doing this. And then like judgment the next day for it, you know?
It's such a vicious cycle. And I have found that tolerating discomfort is probably the biggest key to recovering from disordered eating, from having, like, if you want to have a healthy relationship with food and your body, you have to be willing to tolerate discomfort. Physical discomfort, say you overeat, you have to be willing to just sit with that fullness until it
Mhm.
dissipates. And if you really are struggling and in the thick of an eating disorder, you might be overeating a lot. it's awkward. Like there really truly is this messy period of time where your hunger hormones are really out of whack. You've maybe been suppressing hunger signals for a long time. And that is just, that's a hard place to be. And so you have to give yourself so much grace and compassion. And then you also have to tolerate that discomfort, which also means being willing to gain weight, which I think is the thing that people fear the most of all, because they fear it will signify that they've lost control or that they've let themselves go. And these are myths. Again, these are marketing ploys that have been fed to us by diet culture and the weight loss industry, to make us fear fatness over everything, even at the expense of our health, actually. So forget healthy, right? Really, at the end of the day, people just don't want to be fat. And that is a problem. So we really need to shift how we view fatness, how we view fat people, how we treat ourselves when we gain weight and have more body fat than normal. We all get injured sometimes, right? We have periods of time where maybe we're a new mother, or our work schedule is bonkers, and we can't work out the way we used to, or move our bodies the way we used to, or meal prep the way we used to, and you might gain weight, and that has to be allowed, if you want to have a healthy relationship with your body and with food. So tolerating the discomfort of your body changing, tolerating the uncomfortable emotions of not being able to control other people's perception of you is also really big, because people don't realize it, but they are doing everything they can to protect themselves from being judged by other people, whether it's strangers at the beach or their family members. They don't want to receive a fat phobic, judgmental comment or look, or anything. So figuring out how to not care so much what other people think about you, and understanding that's certainly not something I have control over, right? Disordered eating so much about control. We can't control how other people perceive us or receive us. Sometimes they're not going to like you, and that doesn't mean you need to go punish yourself and like eat Oreos because you're not good enough to be liked by that person. Like back yourself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to do if you've experienced trauma. I was just writing, like before we hopped on, a piece that BuzzFeed is doing, and talking about trauma, and that just so changes your nervous system, but b, your ability to back yourself, to say like I've got me, and like I am the good one here, and I deserve my own support, and like I trust what I'm doing, and like I'm gonna ask for help. But you just, I think when that self-support starts to erode, and then you also aren't in a support system like with a coach or a therapist or something, and you think you're doing the normal thing of like dieting and losing weight and
Yeah.
striving for health. It gets so confusing, and people feel really hopeless and stuck, and tend to think, what am I doing wrong? Like, what is wrong with me? And those are just they're the questions that naturally start to come up. But really, the question is, why isn't this diet resulting in the results that I was promised? Or why am I noticing? Why am I really obsessed with food now? You know, I thought this was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to help me just live my life better if I lost weight. And you know, now life feels really small, and my focus on my body and food feel really big.
Mm-hmm. I love this. So much of this can relate to like all areas of our life too. I heard the that we have to get comfortable tolerating discomfort for the first time actually in a parenting seminar
Huh.
with like yeah, about like holding boundaries with our kids. And then again with I kind of journaled about it and related it to my own people pleasing. And because I loved it so much, the tolerating discomfort, because that is something that I never did. And as soon as I felt discomfort, I would eat, or I would just, do something to make the other person feel happier and, whatever it was. So, yeah, I feel like we can relate this to all areas of our lives. But when you do that, when you tolerate discomfort, so many emotions come up, so many questions, like you were just talking about, and so many emotions. And right now, I'm like really into nervous system stuff. So, can you talk about like when you are healing and like say you're in the recovery process of all of the stuff we've been talking about with food and body image? How does this impact our nervous system at all in the first place? I have a feeling it does. And then how so? And like how do we like help calm it maybe?
Man, tons of good questions in there. Um, let's see. To start, nervous system regulation is absolutely integral to healing from an eating disorder. And maybe this is my experience, but I see it with my clients too, that they say in more or less words that they need to regulate their nervous system, that they don't feel safe in their environment. They don't feel comfortable just, walking the beach because they feel like they're being ogled or observed or, whatever it is. They're really not in their own body. So a lot of people are coming in to session and they are really disassociated,
Hmm.
usually,
Like that's
and
almost the trigger. That's like the start of it.
right. And so food can be a way to disassociate also, when we eat or go into that like binge trance and then you kind of come out of it and you're like, what did I do to myself? Like I feel horrible. Um, but you on some level were trying to regulate your nervous system and you were trying to regulate and control the emotional experience that was causing nervous system dysregulation in the first place. So you feel humiliated because you really kind of botched a pitch at work, right? It was a presentation, it was a pitch. You didn't get the client, you didn't do a great job. You go home, you're feeling humiliated, you're embarrassed, you're disappointed, you've got a lot of emotions, and all of that energy can just get channeled into eating if we don't know how to feel and breathe and hold ourselves through those really intensely uncomfortable emotions. So feeling is healing. I feel like that's what I always come back to at the end of the day is, disease is truly caused by blocking the flow of emotion through the body. If we look at this on an energy level, we're talking about nervous systems. Nervous systems are energy and the energetic part of our body, and we can change our nervous system, we can heal our nervous system, and some people call that like polyvagal work, some people call that energy healing, some people work with the chakras. I love working with the chakras. That's more of like a yogic viewpoint of the nervous system and the human body. But once we learn how to tap into that, we don't need to rely on food to get us through these really uncomfortable emotions. We can rely on our breath. We can rely on our tears. We can rely on a friend to hold us because that is something that is super regulating. So there's like six really key ways actually that you can regulate your nervous system and complete what is called a stress cycle. We go through these cycles of stress all day, and if we don't do something to complete the cycle, then the stress is just stored in the body. And all of the emotions associated with the stress are also stored in the body, especially if we're doing things at the end of the day, like drinking or binging to ignore and avoid and stuff down all of the emotions. Then all of that stuff is just being stored in the body, and that's going to cause disease over time. So we need to increase the flow of energy and emotion so that our body can just process it and our cells and our organs all continue to function healthily. And the way that we can help our bodies regulate on an energetic level is breath work. It is hugging or kissing someone that you deeply love and trust for like 6 to 30 seconds. It's a 6 second kiss at minimum, which feels so awkward, but I love doing that with my husband. It is so grounding. Does usually end up making us giggle, and that is another, like the third way to regulate your nervous system is true deep laughter. Crying is a great way to complete the stress cycle, and so is movement. So, you you go to work, you have a stressful day, you get right in your car, you go home, you're still stressed when you get home. If you maybe are able to walk from the office back to your house, you have some time to expel and process that energy in the body. And by the time you get home, you might feel a little more grounded. You might also need to do some breath work, and maybe you need to cry or journal or something to get your feelings out too. It takes a lot longer than we think it, quote unquote, should take to regulate our nervous systems without these what I call easy button tools. And an easy button tool would be alcohol, it would be cannabis, it would be binge eating, all of these things that are really quick to change our consciousness and how we feel. and maybe even sedate the nervous system a little bit.
Hmm.
So learning how to regulate the nervous system healthily, it's going to take a long time. I know that for me, it's more like 2 hours until I'm finally like unplugged and present and feel really calm and like whatever that stressful event is, it's completely washed off. And sometimes it takes even more than 2 hours. So you have to tolerate discomfort over and over and over again. And that is just an unfortunate truth of being, I think, a healthy, functioning human. But the more we can lean into that, the easier of a time we're going to have in this whole human experience, not just with food and body image, but just as a whole.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned what options are, because in my head, when you were saying that we need to reduce stress in all these different ways, my mind only went to like, so do I go home and do a workout? But that didn't feel complete. It felt like, but that's not honoring the emotions, and that's not like all these other things. So I love that. Do you do journaling, or do you like ask your clients to journal?
I love journaling. I think I started journaling in like the second grade. And I definitely, I don't know what happened with my sleep growing up, but I really do think like lack of sleep and insomnia were the source of my original mental health issues as like a 14-year-old. But I would stay up until like 2 or 3 a.m. journaling. I just loved writing about my day. And like, I definitely, I've always had an active inner landscape. And as a kid, my parents, God bless them, they're brilliant. They're the best. They would do this thing where they would hold me like literally down in bed because I had so much energy. So well, first they would send me out to do like 600 seat drops on the trampoline to wear me out. Then they would hold me as, kind of like you feel like a weighted blanket, like really hold me in bed. And they would let me do this thing called data dumping. And I would just the whole, my whole day, all my thoughts, until I had nothing else to say. And then it was so much easier for me to go to bed. And as an adult, I don't know why it took me so long to implement my own version of the data dump because it
Mhm.
was so helpful growing up. But I have found that if I go all day and then I hop into bed and I think I'm just going to go to sleep, I am sorely mistaken because now I'm still for the first time all day and my brain is like, perfect. We are about to process everything. And so journaling is so important for getting all of the thoughts and the feels out, and really creating more room for quiet and stillness inside. And that has tremendously helped my sleep and then also just my clarity during the day because I'm much more clear on what's influencing how I feel and what I'm thinking. I
Yeah.
love journaling.
I love that you said data dump. I have something that I call an emotional brain dump, where it
Mm.
basically is the same thing. It's just like take everything that's on your brain, on your heart, and like dump it out. But I'm also reminded of a quote that I saw on Instagram once. It said something about how like consider that maybe your disordered eating is not about the food at all. It was about what you could control instead. Like what it was like blocking, what like since you could focus on the food, what were you not thinking about? And I had a whole that like really put me in a tailspin. I had a whole journal entry on that because I was so focused on the food that I was like, huh, at that point in my life when it was like at my worst, what else was going on that I was choosing not to focus on? And at the point
Mm.
I was engaged, not yet married, and that's what I could have focused on was like it didn't feel right, and now I'm divorced. So like if I did focus on
Wow.
that, yeah, it would have been like a very different story. So that was like a really powerful journal entry that I still remember writing down.
What a huge realization to come to. And I love that you found that kind of like inspiration from Instagram because that is the question to ask. Like, and that's what I'm really fortunate in having worked with a ton of providers in the almost 15 years that I've been in long-term recovery. Um, but I had this one provider who refused to talk about the food with me. And I would get so mad at her. Like, I'd be like, Claudia, why can't we talk about, and she would laugh. She'd be like, Haley, you wrote down a quarter of a Reese's cup on your food log. And she would help me see that that was like ridiculous and not what I was what I needed to talk about, which is like
Mm,
all of the intense social anxiety I felt and like the pressure I felt becoming an adult and trying to navigate college and trying to establish my own value system outside of my parents. And I had finished high school. I went to boarding school. It was like a long-term treatment center. I spent like 18 months in treatment. And by the end of it, I was very much so institutionalized. So exiting that institutional setting where I had like total freedom and was completely responsible for my success in life was so overwhelming.
yeah.
And it was so much easier to focus on food and becoming smaller than it was to focus on how deeply uncomfortable it was to become an adult.
Right. I can imagine. So we've talked about so many different solutions and tools and even like ideologies and whatnot. If people would want to work with you and just pick your brain and get like more info on all of that, how can they reach you? And do you have anything going on that you would want to talk about or share?
Yes. Well, they can reach me at kosanacoaching.com or Kosana Coaching on Instagram. I do one-on-one coaching, which I love. And there's a lot of different flavors of coaching. It all stems from the ideology of life coaching, but it's just more specialized. So I can do like relationship work, I do eating disorder work, I do substance work, and a lot of times that's all bundled together. So we're
I
talking
bet.
about all of these things at once. And usually if people are coming to me for eating disorder recovery coaching, we're not talking about food and body for like half of the time at the very least for all of the reasons we just talked through.
Mhm.
So there's one-to-one virtual and in-person coaching. There's also, and I love these so much, surf lessons. So I think you can only talk through your food and body issues to a certain point before you really have to live and play in your body again, and for that to be like a safe and fun experience.
I
So
love
I do
that.
that through surf and yoga as well. And the yoga piece really plays into the nervous system regulation that we were talking about before. So I have a 7-week chakra yoga energy healing for eating disorder recovery program. And this can be done individually or in a group. And the next group should be coming up within the next 2 months. So keep your eyes peeled and follow on socials for that. And then the last thing is I do offer different levels of support. So if you are someone who just wants to check in once a month and have someone to touch base with, like I have that level of support. And then I also have the level where we're meeting up to 5 hours a week and we're going grocery shopping together and we're going to fitness classes together and we're eating your fear foods together, in addition to just talking through and processing your experiences. So all the way up, all the way down, you've got the level of support that you need customized to you.
I love that there's so many different levels because like I said, it took me years to even like verbalize it to a therapist. And I feel like I would have started at that individual level. Like I would have been the person to never talk to you, just sign up and like do the chakra yoga course that you have. And then one-on-one because I wouldn't want anybody else to know. And then maybe dive into the group.
It's
So I
interesting
love
you say that because I'm moving into more groups and I'm loving that environment. It's been super, super cool to see the impact that airing out your shame
it.
has. Like just saying that you're struggling with binge eating in a room of other women is profoundly powerful in reducing the shame and the guilt and the isolation that you feel. So I highly encourage anyone who feels really freaked out by the idea of a group to sign up for just one and just do one group. I promise it won't kill you, and tolerating that discomfort will be so beneficial for your long-term healing. Um, but yeah, groups are freaking intimidating. Absolutely.
Well, there's your lesson, everyone. Tolerate the discomfort, and you can heal your relationship with food. And Haley is the person to help you do that.
Thank
But
you so much, Samantha. It was so nice to chat with you.
yes, thank you for coming on. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's journal entry. I love connecting with my listeners, so make sure you screenshot this episode and tag me on Instagram at samantha.s.says so I know you're listening. And don't forget to grab your free training and journal prompts at www.samanthapenkoff.com/podcast.